In 1956, the young German athlete Paul Averhoff miraculously surpassed his opponents and won the Olympic marathon gold medal. He was called a legend of an era. Now Paul is 70 years old, and his past glory has long faded. He has become an old man living with his wife, who has cancer. But his wife's condition became worse and worse, and she fell down 3 times in a month. The daughter considered her parents' safety and insisted on sending them to a nursing home. Paul didn't like the nursing home. It was lifeless. Every day he had to eat, make crafts, sing hymns, and listen to sermons. He questioned this, but no one supported him. He was so angry that he packed up his things and wanted to leave, but for the first time, his wife did not follow him. His wife didn't want to go back. His wife just wanted to stay in the nursing home. Paul hesitated for a moment, but finally returned to his wife and stayed with her in the nursing home. But what about the rest of the day? He would never wait to die in vain. At this time, he remembered that he had been a long-distance runner who performed miracles. So after dawn, when others were listening to the sermon in the church, he also started running in the woods. His goal is to participate in the next marathon in Berlin and win another one. Others felt that he was overestimating his abilities, so he retorted, "Why not go? Everyone who participates is a winner." But others still took him as a joke, and he couldn't help asking, "Do you know who I am?" No one present except his wife knew who he was, and even his wife was unwilling to support him. But he was not discouraged and decided to resume training. At this time, someone finally remembered something and found a 1956 marathon winning photo from a pile of old things. The photo circulated in the nursing home, and everyone knew that the guy who insisted on training was Paul Averhoff. Now that he is running again, the old people are all very excited, as if they have returned to that legendary era. I recall that when the news of his victory came from the radio, the children ran excitedly through the woods, and the famine and ruins that filled Germany after the war were the future that this victory allowed everyone to see. But at this moment, Paul, who was training for a run in the rain, suddenly fell. The male nurse saw him and rushed him to the infirmary. Fortunately, he was not seriously injured, just a simple fall. So at night, he got up from the bed in the dormitory to get rid of the lactic acid in his body. His wife strongly objected, saying it was unprofessional. Paul said sadly, his wife used to accompany him every time he trained and served as his coach. But now she refuses to help him. This is wrong. How could his wife forget the tacit understanding they had in the past? Finally, Paul begged his wife to help him. He couldn't do it alone. His wife looked worried, but finally agreed. During subsequent training, Paul was no longer alone, and she began to accompany him throughout the entire training process, recording and reviewing each training session. Their behavior was noticed by the people around them, and gradually Evrion's attitude changed from watching indifferently to enthusiastically cheering. People kept leaving from previous boring activities and sitting on the benches outside to watch Paul running around and around. The nursing home is gradually gaining vitality, but the nursing home is not happy because some elderly people have already contracted pneumonia because they went out to watch jogging. Therapist Muller talked to Paul and tried to persuade him to stop training, but Paul was unmoved. Others want to use facts to persuade him to face up to his age and body. He cannot defeat young people. To refute this, Paul and the young male carer, Toby, agreed to run 15 laps in the park next Monday. This game attracted Evrion's attention. Although everyone supported Paul, they had no confidence in whether he could beat Toby. When the race started, Toby was far ahead, but Paul was not in a hurry, and his wife just reminded him to keep his speed. Halfway through the race, Paul began to accelerate and gradually caught up with Toby. But Toby also worked hard and surpassed Paul again. In the final sprint, Toby also showed fatigue, but Paul still maintained his speed and used his strength at the last moment to overtake Toby before the finish line and achieve the final victory. The onlookers applauded vigorously, as if it was not only Paul who was victorious, but also themselves. After the game, everyone celebrated for Paul. While chatting, everyone talked about their helplessness. They had children but could only live lonely and boring lives in a nursing home. But this chat was a rare pleasure. Everyone was laughing. They hadn't been so relaxed for a long time. The next day, a neurologist came to the nursing home. He was going to diagnose Paul at the request of the nursing homes. Paul showed great repulsion. He feels that he is in good health and does not need to see a doctor at all. But in fact, he showed obvious memory decline at the time of diagnosis and showed strong bipolar tendencies when facing the pressure of death. Finally, he suddenly ran out of the consultation room, packed his suitcase, and quickly escaped from the nursing home with his wife. He did not go directly to his daughter, but first called media friends he was familiar with in the past, and then took his wife into the studio. Through the TV screen, he expressed all his dissatisfaction and complaints about the nursing home. The host felt sorry for him And he responded, "There have been many worse times, such as wars, famines and winters, that followed, but he never gave in the face of difficulties, but always persisted, because this is how their generation survives." Everyone in the nursing home saw this episode. Afterwards, the attitude of the elderly suddenly became collectively negative towards the various time-killing projects arranged by the nursing home. Nursing homes always say that the outside world does not belong to them, but they all know this is just a lie. Paul will start running again. He is also an old man, but he still lives in the outside world. Paul took his wife to live in his daughter's house, and after dawn, the two went to Berlin to sign up for the marathon. At this time, the registration time had passed, but because of Paul's status as a former champion, the organizer made an exception and accepted his registration. His daughter has no time to take care of her parents, and she hopes that her parents can return to the nursing home. For this reason, she went to the nursing home to discuss it, hoping that the hospital could give her father enough respect. But the nursing home is also very aggrieved. It is not easy to manage hundreds of elderly people, and the nursing home does not want anything to go wrong. Paul insisted on running, which turned his own trouble into everyone's trouble. His daughter returned home and saw Paul busy doing things, but making a mess. She couldn't bear it anymore, and had a big quarrel with her father. Her mother stood by Paul. Because of this training, she regained the feeling of being with Paul. The next day, Paul was recognized by passers-by while running. The passers-by shouted at him excitedly, "You are so awesome." He speeded up proudly. But next, he saw an ambulance, and his wife fainted again and was taken to the hospital. The doctor said that his wife had a tumor in her head, and asked her family to prepare to say goodbye. The sad Paul took his wife to the gym. He wanted to follow his wife, but she said he had to participate in the race and keep running. His wife was very confident, but Paul was not convinced in his heart. That night the two recalled many things in the past, from the first acquaintance to the first kiss. Everything was so beautiful. While sleeping, Paul held onto his wife's hand tightly because he didn't want her to leave. But the next morning, his wife never woke up. After the funeral, Paul still kept talking about his wife's past. His daughter couldn't bear it anymore, and negotiated with her father that she needed to have her own private life, so she wanted to send her father to a nursing home immediately. Paul was unwilling and was willing to continue training, even if he is alone. His daughter shouted angrily, "Mom is gone, please don't bother me anymore." Paul stopped talking and went out in silence. From then on, he began to wander around, and when he was sleepy, he would find a bench on the roadside to lie down. Later, the police found him and sent him to a nursing home. The other old people welcomed him back, but he was the only one who knew that everything had changed. He still insisted on training during the day, but once he stopped, he would think of his wife uncontrollably, especially at night. When he suddenly woke up and saw that his wife's bed was empty, he would go crazy with sadness. Toby, who was on night duty, forcibly took him aside and tied him up while keeping him quiet. In fact, Toby didn't want to do this, but there were regulations in the nursing home, and he had to do it. The next day, other old people interceded on Paul's behalf, and Toby took the opportunity to propose to the dean that Paul should be allowed to run. His race would be on Sunday. The dean disagreed. When Paul lost his wife, his world was over. He also had suicidal tendencies, so he would slowly die, and there would be no other possibility. The dean refused to give Paul a chance, but the matter did not end there. On Sunday, Mueller was about to preach at church, when she suddenly found herself locked in the office, and she could not get out. An old man in the church stepped forward and announced in public that Paul had left. About half an hour ago, Toby appeared beside Paul like an angel. He loosened Paul's bonds, shook Paul awake from despair and was dying, and let him go to fulfill his and his wife's wish. Later, Mueller finally escaped from the office, but there was no one left in the church. All the elderly people left the nursing home and went to the stadium to watch Paul play. The marathon has begun. Runners from 125 countries crowded the long street, and there are about 1 million spectators on the roadside. Paul was in the running team. Although he could not catch up with the high-level runners at the front, he ran firmly and calmly on his own track. The race was broadcast live, and when her daughter saw Paul on TV, all her unhappiness disappeared instantly. Now she just wanted to go to the stadium and see her amazing father. Toby served Paul along the way, and Paul gradually surpassed some opponents. From time to time, some people around him gave up midway, but Paul did not. He kept persisting. After 3:30 p.m., Paul arrived outside the stadium. He was very tired, and his steps began to wobble, but he never stopped. Victory was just ahead, and his wife's encouragement was still in his ears. He kept running forward, and finally he ran into the venue. The audience suddenly burst into excitement, and people applauded and cheered loudly. He crossed the finish line amidst the applause. Someone put a cloak of victory on him. Only then did he have the energy to look around. He saw his daughter and the group of old friends in the nursing home, and he laughed from the bottom of his heart. After his wife left, he felt for the first time that there was someone around him who loved him. Even if his wife is gone, he is not alone. A year later, Paul is still living in a nursing home, but now the nursing home is completely changed. The old people gather and dance, and the sluggishness of the past is swept away. Sometimes Paul would leave the nursing home and go to his daughter's home with flowers. During this year, his daughter got married, had a good husband, and had a newborn child. Paul carried his grandson to the courtyard to bask in the sun, and also used the stopwatch left by his wife to entertain the child. Now he is no longer afraid of death. In the days before his death, he once again lived his life as a legend. This is the German movie, The Last Race, released in 2013. What should people look like when they grow old? The usual impression is that of being diseased, sluggish, useless, repeated every day. If anything, death comes at different times. Paul felt the same way. When he lived in a nursing home, everyone was dying and the outside world no longer belonged to them. They are locked up in a nursing home, watching others die while waiting boredly for their own death. But there are always people who are not willing to do this. They want to use their actions to prove that aging is not a reason to give up. As long as they are unwilling to isolate themselves from the outside world will not abandon them. Paul is such a person. Of course, his aging body cannot regain the glory of the past, but his spirit of never giving up is enough to make him win on his own track. He used his legend to tell the world that even if he is very old, age should not define everything. As long as there is still passion in the heart, even a waning body can burst out with amazing power. In fact, what people fear most is not age, but the acceptance of fate that comes with age. Before the outside world gave him a test, he sentenced himself to death first. It's just that this kind of life, without accepting fate, is often very hard, so people need companions. Whether family or friends, everyone who struggles with fate hopes to draw support from the care of those around him. Legends are not created by one person, but by a group of people. Everyone's support gathered on Paul, and Paul used his persistence to give everyone an example of fighting against fate. Everyone had a chance to shine at the last moment, and Paul chose to race. After him, there may be more and more people who will no longer give up their track easily. I am HKY Movies, looking forward to meeting you next time.